Loading. All right, we are in. Welcome back, everyone, to the show. It's been a couple weeks. We just had a ton of stuff going on with college and getting all those annoyingly large projects done, but we're back now, and we're hoping to continue this as much as possible. We haven't really picked a set day for it, though. Obviously, we're doing it Sunday today, which is a little bit different, but we're working on it. We have schedules.
Yeah, hopefully we'll have less stuff to do over Christmas break and won't have to take like a 3-week break or whatever it was we just did. But
Yeah, and it'll be kind of nice. I'm kind of excited to set up my backdrop when I get back home from my dorm, just because I'm graduating Friday, I guess Friday, yeah, which is kind of wild. Graduating college in 2.5 years, but it's kind of cool. So I'm excited to get home and be able to set up my room and get a little bit more of a fancy backdrop. Yeah.
Yeah, that is exciting. I am not graduating college yet. I'm not going to say sadly because I'm not sad about it. Expensively, at least.
Expensively, yeah. Your wallet doesn't like it too much. My wallet still doesn't like it, even though I'm graduating a year and a half early. That's just college, though. It's definitely a scam.
Yeah, 100%.
Every college student I know thinks college is a scam. It's kind of interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Anyways, so we got some stuff to discuss today. We're planning on making this maybe a little bit of a shorter show. I don't know. Although it could very easily just end up being an hour and a half still. We just keep yapping.
Finals are still in full swing, so
that's true.
We'll see how it goes.
All my finals got thrown on the same day, which just it kind of pisses me off because like I have to wake up for an 8 a.m. and then I have a class right after, and then I have a night class. So Tuesdays is completely full. I'd rather it be spread out a little bit so I could study for one test at a time. But
yeah, having a bunch in a row sucks. I only have one exam early tomorrow morning, actually, but then I have a very, very large paper.
Yeah, you've been working nonstop at that paper.
Yeah, I have like 15 books here that I've got.
Yeah, he's just got like
clustered around,
surrounded by books. It's kind of frightening. I'm just gonna leave him alone when he works on that paper. All right. Anyways, so first thing on the agenda today is to discuss. We wanted to have a discussion about the role of faith or religion within politics, because we think that this is a fairly contentious issue, both coming from the church and especially coming from those outside the church. So we just want to kind of discuss a little bit about that.
Yeah. So why don't we start by like trying to lay a little groundwork for that? So if you're a Christian like Tyler and I are, then your faith is going to inform everything you do, like by necessity, and that's going to include politics. You can't just like turn off your faith when you go into the voting booth or something. It has to inform it somehow.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of people that try to pretend and separate faith from politics, but just because of the present reality that moral issues at least seem to be at the forefront of politics, which for better or for worse, that's just the case. And just because of that, like I find it very challenging to be able to ignore those moral issues in favor of, say, like economic issue, which could still be considered a moral issue, but maybe less so than something like abortion, for instance.
Right. Yeah, and it's tricky when it comes to the moral issues because some of the things we consider immoral are not necessarily things that we should ban on like a nationwide scale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is something that I've been quite conflicted about recently, is trying to like, what is the extent that like one could implement their faith like into law? Because obviously you have instances where like murder is a sin and murder is also outlawed in society, and you get punished if you do murder. So like there is some overlap there, but I think that's because you don't necessarily have to be a Christian to believe murder is wrong. That's just a general perspective within pretty much the world at this point.
I think for like a starting ground of like trying to find kind of that common ground between Christians and non-Christians is we have to ban anything that like causes bodily harm. to another person.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's just generally necessary for society to flourish,
Yeah.
is being able to try to at least promote human flourishing without while removing any. Well, I forget what I'm trying to say.
No, it makes sense though. Like if you're allowed to murder if you're allowed to steal, society just devolves into complete anarchy, and
Mhm.
there's no way to enforce laws, and people
Right,
can just do whatever
right, and
they.
like even like in like let's just say like abortion for an issue. Like obviously, I think that if you are Christian, you should be pro-life.
Mhm.
I think the Bible is very clearly pro-life and
Yeah.
supports that position. But I also recognize that, like, if you try to ban abortion overnight, it would probably lead to potentially rioting or just complete chaos in society. And we saw like the uproar over Roe versus Wade getting overturned, which didn't really affect a lot of people if they are in blue states. It really just brought that issue to the states, but as it should be.
Mhm.
So, like, actually, I'm kind of critical of a lot of like pro-life advocates because of their insistence on focusing on the actual outline of abortion entirely. When I think we should be taking little bit steps, because I think when it comes to like this issue, it's going to require an actual moral shift in society in general before
Yeah.
it actually gets to the point where banning it would become reasonable to do.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I don't think you would disagree that the ultimate goal we're working towards is like a complete ban on abortion. But
Mhm.
to do that right away isn't really feasible. And I think the pro life movement does recognize that, even if maybe they don't make that very
I think
clear.
it's mostly in
The
their
rhetoric.
rhetoric. I think that,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think so.
I mean, part of it is just like the reality of like the internet, where like using extreme rhetoric is usually going to get you more notice,
Right.
like rage baiting.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, like it's kind of tricky because like you should we should still, of course, advocate for these Christian positions,
Hmm.
and I think that that's a good thing. There's a lot of people that don't even like that, because for some reason they might be conflating like, oh, you're trying to force your faith onto me, when in reality we're not forcing them to do anything, we're just giving them an idea. Of course they might have the fear that we would eventually bring in legislation to support the Christian viewpoint, but at least at the moment I think that's pretty unlikely just because of the current state of society.
Yeah, and if we go back to kind of the problem of abortion in particular and the common ground of banning bodily harming other people, you can look at it through the perspective that the unborn infant is a human being, and so abortion is bodily harming that human being, so it should be banned. So we're not doing it like specifically or only because the Bible says, we're doing it because we think it's necessary for the good of society
Hmm.
to
And like
ban that.
another example of that would be like Christian sexual ethics. So like saving sex till marriage, I think like even there's a lot of secular individuals who are recognizing that maybe Christianity, or just I mean you could just say religion in general, most religions tend to restrict sex to some extent. And like you could people are just like, oh, maybe being completely sexually free or running wild with it may not necessarily be the most appropriate or the best thing for society.
Mhm.
So I'm actually kind of curious to see how that particular issue is, because obviously that's another issue that like I've seen on like Twitter, some Christians advocating for banning sex outside marriage, which
Yeah.
I mean obviously it's probably just rage bait, and how the heck would you actually implement it? I don't know. It would have to be completely 1984, which I would strongly condemn.
I always find it funny when the millennials on the internet are like, I don't understand. All the Gen Z kids are such Puritans. It's like, yeah, because
Yeah, the Puritan movement's what's called.
we've seen that the way you did it was not healthy. It did not
Well,
work. So we're doing
I mean,
something else.
I think I mean, part of the reality of the Puritan movement might not necessarily be that like Gen Z is actively avoiding some of
Yeah,
the more
that's fair.
that like there's like it even could just say like internet addiction, or just people hanging out at social events less frequently would obviously lead to people probably having less extramarital sex, and also like you could say like they're probably doing less drugs or drinking less if they're not even getting out of the house.
Yeah, that's fair. That's probably a
But like
bigger
at the same
contribution.
time, like I've seen evidence to suggest that Gen Z is trending more conservative than millennials. So I think there is something going on there like that.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, it's not like a huge trend in that the entire generation is shifting that way. But if you look at the people online who are like tuned into the Gen Z culture, there does generally seem to be more of a more cautious approach, at least, to extramarital sex.
Yeah, I think so. It's kind of it's actually really interesting to see where this actually goes to. Like, will the pendulum swing super far, or will it just be a little bit more gradual or something like that? Because even like say Trump getting elected swung the pendulum to Republicans. Like
Hmm.
the Republican Party, at least in my eyes, sacrificed a lot of their moral position to gain a few votes. So it's sort
Yeah.
of like a we won at what cost sort of scenario. So are we actually going to like I don't think this pendulum swing is going to actually get to the point where it'll actually make a lot of conservative Christians actually happy. Although like obviously it might be the better of two options you could say.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that if you look at like the nation and probably the world as a whole, people are still overall moving left.
Hmm.
Like that the movement left is smaller than it was before, but it overall, if you look at the trends, I think people are still moving
Yeah, I
politically
mean you
left.
can even look at like a lot of Trump's Avengers and a lot of them are former Democrats.
Hmm.
Um, but the thing is a lot of them that are with Trump didn't necessarily change too much of their viewpoints at all. So they are still largely left leaning, at least left leaning like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So it just kind of shows like even Trump himself probably would have considered himself on the left. And some people might even still define Trump on the left of the spectrum, depending on how you define it.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Hmm. So I mean, like, let's dig a little bit deeper into the idea of forcing one's beliefs on others, because I think
Sure.
that it's very very controversial, and I think that it might also there could be some sort of fear mongering coming into that. So I don't know. What's your opinion?
I think what happens frequently is people look at it from like a historical perspective and they're like, oh, for the last, I don't know, prior to the foundation of the United States, for like the 1500 years before that, you see a lot of instances of governments that had a state religion, and that state religion, at least in the West, was generally Christianity. And people look at that and they see some of the negative effects that came as a result of that. And they say, we don't want that. So if there's any attempt by Christians to impose their moral or spiritual beliefs on us, we're going to fight it
Hmm.
violently. Not
Yeah,
not violently in the sense of like violence, but
aggressively.
aggressively is a
Yes. Yeah.
better word. Yes.
Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. But like even now, you're starting to see some pretty, I guess, culturally respected individuals who are maybe giving at least the ideals of Christianity maybe a second chance because of the
Yeah.
recognition of okay, maybe these rules were in place for a reason, just to keep society functioning, even if they don't want to necessarily commit and say these rules are part of God's morality that runs the world. But
Yeah. And if you look at kind of the opposite of that, what happens if we force atheism instead of Christianity upon people? The USSR was not a good place to live. Like, it
yeah,
does
I
not
think
work.
I think that's a good point to mention too. Is that like you can get mad about people forcing their religion on people, but like for the most part, you will be forcing your own religion or pseudo religion onto others. For example, you have the far left progressive movement, which is in a lot of ways seemingly be fairly aggressive towards any part of the opposition and trying to force acceptance or force people to align with their views. So I think it goes definitely both ways. And that's just something that it's a little bit tricky, which is why I think that it's if you want to condemn all of it, that's fine. But I think you
Mhm.
also have to recognize that most people will be an advocate for their moral system or religion in general, and that's just something that just it is what it is type of situation. So you can't fully remove that from like government.
Yeah, and especially because we live in a democracy, so it's like people are supposed to vote for the candidate who they think is best going to represent them. And the idea is that the candidate who represents the most people is going to get into office to then impose their policies upon the nation. So it's not like we're like going out there with sword and gun trying to forcibly convert you to Christianity or something. All we're doing is voting and maybe advocating for our position. And that's just how
Right, and I think
democracy
there
works.
are some examples of Christians who go a little bit too far, get in people's
Yeah,
faces type of
that's
stuff.
fair.
Kind of your Turner Burn fiery type Christians. I mean, some of them are just protesting, maybe with inflammatory language,
Mhm.
which I mean, in that case, they're just advocating for their position, and they're still not really forcing anyone. But if like maybe they're counter protesting, getting in people's faces, and I think that's an appropriate way to conduct like advocation for an idea.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think if we're trying to impose is even not a very good word to use here because it implies that we're like forcing it upon people. If we're trying to convince people and then put our idea of basic ethics into like legal code, we need to do it
Mhm.
gently and by the book, I guess.
Yeah, and it's also like this might be kind of slightly different topic, but like I want to because okay, I had a thought. Where to go? Okay, right. So if we're just looking at this from like a gospel conversion perspective, you can't hold a gun to someone's head, tell them to say Christ is Lord, and expect them to actually convert. And
Yeah.
that could just be a lot of yeah, false conversion. That's not actually going to bring someone to Christ. It just means that maybe they're being forced to at least act out, like attend church or something like that. And I think that's not the correct way because I want people to come to Christianity out of their own um, desire to know Christ instead of either like fear of hell or out of some sort of legal force to align themselves with the Christian worldview.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think that the law should, in any sense, allow that kind of convert or else kind of thing, nor should it provide special benefits to those who are Christians. Like, what
Right.
we want to do is just assert that there is an objective set of moral laws and then put those into a legal code to the best of our ability so that people largely follow them, which will overall lead to a better society and a more conducive environment for gentle, godly evangelism.
Sure. And I think that the dream of like a perfectly Christian society, I don't think will be fully realized in this life. Obviously, in the
Mhm.
new earth, the new creation, that's when we actually would achieve that. So I think to attempt to reach that may not necessarily be the smartest way. And like just like how banning abortion overnight would not necessarily be great. We want to take maybe baby steps towards that ultimate goal. And like obviously, you'd have to influence the morality of society so that they accept that uh, ethic, I guess.
Yeah, for sure.
My camera blurry again.
Oh, yeah, looks like it is. That's
It
weird.
is great. What if I? Okay, we'll just work with that, I guess.
Okay,
This is what
hopefully it
happens when you try to do
Oh,
these
there we
videos on
go.
a potato laptop. Oh, it's back. Okay, perfect.
Back.
All right. Anything else we want to discuss with this topic? We're at about 20 minutes.
Um, I don't think so. I mean,
Okay,
we could talk about this for hours probably and get into
it's
like
true.
the really really specifics, like what does the path look like to a complete abortion ban? That's
Hmm.
a huge conversation that we don't really have time for here. But like
Right.
it's a difficult question, but yeah,
All right. So let's go ahead and get into the next segment here. We're gonna just talk movies for a little bit.
yeah,
So let me pull this up. So first of all, we finished the Hobbit trilogy with Battle of the Five Armies, and we have a few thoughts, not nearly as much as before.
Yeah,
I mean, part of the problem with this movie is just the fact that it is a large portion of it is just one continuous action scene,
right.
which I think removes a lot of work with characters or stuff like that. So, obviously, as this is your first time viewing it, so what's your opinion on it?
Well, I'll start with like the one positive of it comparative to the other movies, and that's that I thought it looked better. Like in the past two movies, in my reviews of them, I kind of complained about the CGI. I didn't think it looked great. In this movie, there were no points where I was like, wow, that looks horrendously bad. Like there was a lot of CGI, and I generally prefer less CGI to more CGI, but overall it looked good.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's definitely a point to say. But obviously, you got quite a bit of problems with it as well. I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, it the entire movie is one battle basically. And like I like my battle scenes as much as the next guy, they're fun to watch, but when it's 2.5 hours of a battle that gets frankly kind of absurd at times, it's
Yeah,
kind of hard to stay invested in it.
and it also just feels like the general battle doesn't have as much weight to it as, like, say, the Ride of the Rohirrim or like Helm's Deep and Lord of the Rings.
Yeah,
Those battles seem to be a lot more epic because of the amount of weight that they actually hold in that actual story. On top of the fact that the actual battling at least feels more realistic than, oh, I don't know what's an example. We're gonna ride this chariot with the yaks into the enemies because why not?
yeah, yeah, for sure. Those battles had a lot more stakes, and honestly, because they were kind of simpler, there was nothing really crazy happening during them. They
Hmm.
felt more epic. You could better sympathize with the characters who were risking their lives here, whereas compared to this, which was just pure spectacle, which made it difficult to, again, care too much about what was happening.
Right. And like it takes so much away from potential character work. It feels like the character work is rushed maybe in a couple parts because like the character work all happens at like the start or like right at
Yeah,
the end. And you don't really get much character work at all in between because of course it's just a spectacle of a battle.
right. And also, the dialogue in this movie was horrible. It was just stereotypical line after stereotypical line after stereotypical line.
Yeah,
Sometimes
like
I was like, why is he even saying this? It doesn't even make sense in light of the last thing that was said. And yet I've heard someone say this line in a movie like a million times before.
right. And it just feels like the Hobbit movies in general just have a lot less like Tolkienian like language to it
Yeah.
compared to Lord of the Rings, which I think the dialogue in Lord of the Rings is phenomenal.
Mhm.
The Hobbit, yeah, the language just seem a little bit simpler. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe that's just because they have a smaller book to go off of to actually pull quotes from
Mhm.
and something like that. But I feel like they could have done maybe a little bit better with that.
And I guess to kind of be fair to the movie, they had quite a lot of room for creative liberty here because I'm pretty sure that in the book Bilbo is unconscious for like the entire battle, so you hear pretty much nothing about it.
True.
So they tried to imagine it to the best of their abilities, and I think they just let their imaginations run a little bit too wild.
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of it.
So on a scale of 1 to 10, what would you rate this movie, Tyler?
Mm, honestly, probably like a five is just like a mediocre movie. Sure, it might be like a spectacle, so like I'm not gonna like be bored to death by it, but at the same
Mhm.
time, like there's just not much to like there's not really much rewatchability. I think the other two Hobbit films have a little bit more rewatchability than this
Sure.
one.
So I think my ratings so far have been I gave the first one a 6 and I gave the second one a 4. I think this one was the worst of the three, probably. So I'm going to give it a 3.5.
All right.
What that feels kind of harsh, honestly, but
Yeah,
I
if you
can't rate this
once you
higher.
get below 4, it just feels harsh. I get like
Yeah, yeah. Maybe I'm being a little bit too objective, and I should give the movie more
maybe.
grade or something. But
All right.
oh, and Randall is the best character in this
Yeah,
movie.
we both were just like Drenduel is just based. He's a boss. He's the
Yeah,
only one actually getting stuff done. He just bodies the orc army, and like I mean, sure he's there on his own self interest, but he felt like he was doing a lot more than some of the other characters.
I'm pretty sure they were trying to portray him as kind of like a bad person in the movie, and it just wasn't coming across to me. He just seemed like pretty base through this entire movie,
He's
honestly.
just like, yeah, I'm gonna bring my army. I'm gonna help you guys out.
Yeah,
Like, yeah, I want the gems and the mountain and whatever, but like, it felt like they just kind of dropped that entire thing. He just started being a warrior. I don't know,
yeah. Best character in the movie, in
best
my
character.
opinion.
All right, moving on. So we also, when was this? Last week we watched the
It was
Interstellar
Monday.
re-release in theaters,
Yes.
and it wasn't in like the biggest screen possible or whatever it's called. So it was just kind of at pretty standard theater, I'd say. But of course, it still is going to be much bigger screen than your TV at home. So there's a lot of that. So
Right.
what did you think of watching it on the big screen?
Well, I think first of all, this is like an incredibly visually impressive movie. Like if you think about the wormhole scene, the black hole scene, like those are some of the scenes in cinema. They're phenomenal. So to see them on the big screen was like absolutely awesome. And also just the sound was so much better in the theater too. This is also a very audibly great movie, and to have kind of
Mhm.
that three-dimensional movie theater sound really augmented the experience of it.
Yeah, and that was the main thing for me. Like the visuals were cool at times. But like they didn't blow me away like I expected to, but the sound absolutely blew me away. The sound was phenomenal. I really loved feeling a lot of the vibrations in the chair, being able to get that more immersive experience. Like during the No Time for Caution scene when gosh, what's his name? Dr. Mann or whatever, like
Mhm.
says there is a moment and blows out the airlock. Like that absolutely shook the theater. Like I almost
Yeah,
got jump scared by it. It came out of nowhere.
I
That
think
was
I did
something.
get jump scared by it actually.
Yeah, it was quite nice. Of course, the score is already phenomenal. But able to hear that
Mhm.
in that with that theater sound is just a whole nother level of awesome. And I mean, like the movie itself, I like the movie. It's probably I want to say top 30 maybe movies for me. I know some people don't really like it, and that's understandable. I think that some of it is kind of slow in the pacing. It's a really long movie at times, and you can feel that
Yeah.
during some scenes. But yeah, I would say it's a very strong movie just because of how powerful the soundtrack is, as well as I think some of the more emotional moments are probably the best Christopher Nolan has done in any of his films, as far as like emotional scenes.
Yeah, I think probably so. This is my probably second favorite Nolan movie after Inception. It's probably in my top 20, I think. I do have some gripes with the resolution of the movie and how they like solve the problem or whatever, but overall this is a phenomenal movie.
Mhm. Yeah, and the like the waves scene, I don't remember. I can't remember what the name of that. That was really, really cool spectacle moment to just watch that
Yeah.
to its full extent in theaters. And yeah, I mean, on like the thing is that it really just like enhanced my enjoyment of the film already in like a lot of ways. The sound, especially the visuals, being able to see that in the theater and kind of like feel the sound at moments just made it really really great. Did it actually improve how much I enjoyed the movie? I don't know. I don't think it really affected my position of it in the rankings.
Yeah.
Just because like I've seen this movie enough times where like yeah, it's cool to see it with the movie theater sound, with the movie theater screen, but the actual story within it's not going to really change my perspective on that.
Yeah, that's fair. And I don't think it moved up the rankings for me either because of this. But it's one of those things where it's like they're re-releasing Interstellar. Okay, take my money, please. I have to see that in theaters.
Right. Yeah, we paid like what like $20 tickets for this, which is just absurd.
Yeah, and I also had to cancel my tickets 2 times because I got them
That's
on the
right.
wrong day. So I lost like an additional $5 in like
Mhm.
service fees or whatever for
Yeah.
all.
Yeah, that was yeah, these tickets are so crazy, and I mean, like, under like I mean, this was at AMC, which, of course, like, AMC is kinda notorious for being expensive, although, like, all theaters kinda are. Of course, we went in the IMAX screen, they have a few different options, so, unfortunately, we might have got the bigger screen, but we didn't get the recliners, which was kinda sad.
Yeah, that was kind of sad. But it was
Um,
like a Monday afternoon too. It wasn't like a super like everyone's going to see a movie on
yeah,
this time, and it was
yeah.
still like $20 or
You know
whatever.
what? The theater was packed too, like, it was
Yeah,
absolutely
every
packed. It was
seat
great
was
to see,
filled.
actually, like, how often nowadays do you go to the theater and the theater's packed? You don't see that very often anymore,
Ever. I mean, we went to Dune.
especially on a Monday at 3
Didn't
PM.
we go to Dune 2 like a couple days after it came out?
I feel like that's right, yeah.
And I don't think the theater was as packed for that as it was for Interstellar.
It was a full theater, I wouldn't say it was packed, though, if I remember
Okay.
correctly.
Yeah, but
Um,
I
Obviously, Doom Part 2 did have good word of mouth, so that it doesn't
yeah,
surprise me if that theaters would have been more packed for that.
yeah, sure. That's fair.
Mhm. So what's your rating of Interstellar out of 10? Did it change at all after you saw it in theaters?
I don't think it changed at all. I feel like it's an 8.5 out of 10 for me.
8 out of 10, okay, cool. I'd say I'd probably give it I don't know, this is like one of those movies where, like, my critic ranking and personal ranking might be a little bit different. I would say personally, I'd
Sure.
probably also rate it 8.5 if I'm just being just from an objective critical standpoint, probably like a 7. So, like, there's a little bit of separation there, but yeah.
Yeah,
I
and
think
I think that that's valid.
mhm. It's a good watch pretty much every time I do watch it, though. So, yeah,
Yeah.
it definitely is in my top 30 movies.
All right, do we
Yeah.
want to move on to our last movie topic
Yes,
then?
we haven't watched this movie yet, it did come out, the War of the Rohirrim movie, and it's basically doing exactly what a lot of people predicted it would do. Everything from having a girl boss bait and switch to being essentially bashed by people, and I'm not sure how it's doing in the box office, but I haven't heard like it's doing anything major with it. I think it's actually
Mhm.
doing quite bad if I saw something correctly. I mean, Twitter's only
Yeah,
so reliable of a news source.
right. I don't know a whole lot about this movie, to be honest, but like, it just seems like a bad idea to me. Oh, this is kind of weird, actually. I'm looking it up on Rotten Tomatoes right now, and it's 83% audience to only 51% critics.
That is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, we could try to compare that to like Rings of Power or something.
Well, yeah, let me look up Rings of Power.
Rings
That
of
would
Power.
probably.
Shoot.
Where did-
Because I mean, like, it wouldn't surprise me if just like casual fans of Lord of the Rings who don't know like the lore. I mean, I'm not super familiar with the deep lore of Lord of the Rings either. I just know that people who are upset by the movie, and just as someone who typically likes stories to be honored in the lore, and that I can understand a lot of what they're saying and agree with their perspective on watching things that they like get ruined.
So, Rings of Power is actually pretty much the exact opposite. It's 84% critics and 49% audience,
Interesting.
which is
Yeah.
weird because if you've got the girl boss in this movie, I mean, generally the critics like the girl boss.
Yeah, it's kind of
That's strange.
it does seem a little bit strange, and I mean, like, obviously, I'm skeptical of the high Rotten Tomatoes score for Rings of Power as well. I
Yeah,
mean, who knows if money's involved or anything like that to get your movie to have good scores, but it is kind of interesting. And I mean, I don't know if I'm going to see this. I do think I probably will end up seeing this,
yeah,
likely with my family, just because like it's a film that like everyone would probably want to go see. So like I'll be able to, of course, make my own opinion at that point. But right now, I'm not exactly going in with high expectations or high hope that it'll be
sure.
everything that I want it to be.
I don't plan to go and see this. I'm honestly annoyed that they made it in anime, and I don't know that I know enough about like Lord of the Rings lore to actually appreciate it, even if it is good. So
Right, and I think like when you make the protagonist a character that Tolkien never named,
mhm.
and then you give her a name that does not that Tolkien would never give her, from what I've seen. Her name is not like Rohan has like one type of origin, and Hera is just not a name that would be from that, at least from what I've
Mhm.
seen. And I mean, I'm assuming that's right. Tolkien being a linguist, and of course, drawing inspiration from different cultures for some of his different groups within his world. That makes a lot of sense that that would be the case. And of course, I think Helm Hammerhand should have been the main character of the movie.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not super familiar with his story or Middle Earth during this time period, but I do know that he is that. From what I've seen, a lot of people wished that he was the main character opposed to his daughter.
Yeah, and it seems more natural to make the named kind of fan favorite character like the main character in the movie that's trying to appeal to Lord of the Rings fans.
Hmm.
Like, imagine someone who didn't expect the bait and switch. You go into the theater expecting to learn about Helm Hammerhand, and then instead you have to hear about like the random female girl boss protagonist who Tolkien didn't even name.
Right. I mean, like even like if you look at this poster, I'm assuming this is the poster
Mhm.
for it. Like, I mean, from this, you can't even really tell who the main characters are supposed to be from. Like, I don't even know.
Yeah, any of those middle three could be the main character.
Really, yeah. So I don't know. I feel like I'll watch it just because I'm kind of interested to see what they actually did, though. Going in with low expectations, I mean, maybe going in low expectations mean they'll actually like it more than anticipated. I'm not. We'll see how that goes. I don't have my hopes up, obviously,
Yeah,
but I don't know. It might still, like if I just like detach it from Tolkien and his world, maybe it's somewhat enjoyable. I don't know.
yeah, who knows? And it's possible that they like made a good movie, even though they maybe weren't as true as they should have been to the source
Yeah, I
material.
mean, and the fact that the critics are kind of bashing it though may suggest otherwise in that instance.
I honestly have no idea what to do with this Rotten Tomatoes score. Because this is the kind of movie where I was like,
Because
okay,
it's
we need to trust the audience, right? Because they're
mhm.
doing the girl boss thing, so they're doing politics, so the critics are going to love it because of the critics'
Yeah,
politics.
that's kind of like the general rule of
Yeah.
Rotten Tomatoes is that if the critics is low but the audience is high, then the movie will probably be good for normal people, I guess.
Mhm.
That usually is a good indication of having uh, I don't want to say more traditional values, or maybe just like not having progressive values in the movie or something like that.
Or at least it like avoids the culture war at all. It just doesn't even try to say anything
Right,
super
right.
political, and so it appeals to a wider audience.
True. Yeah, I don't know. That's an interesting conversation. I think we should go on and get to our next topic here, which is going to be our
Yeah, right.
theology segment. The topic that we chose is on baptism, or specifically, well, I guess just baptism in general. We're going to probably focus on child baptism, baby baptism, something like that. So then you are, I think, much more knowledgeable when it comes to scripture and theology than I am. So go ahead and get us started here on what maybe like the issue is.
Yeah, so this might turn out to be a bad idea because, like, if you ask me to talk about theology, I can go on forever. I'm a theology major right now, and I'll probably try to go for a theology PhD someday. So I'll try to keep this brief. But the main issue we're going to be looking into here is, should infants be baptized, or is baptism only for believers? Those are like your two primary positions. So on like the Lutheran and the more Reformed side of the spectrum, which is primarily like the Presbyterian Church, they say that you should baptize infants, and there are generally two justifications they have for that. The Lutherans say, well, we see infant baptism in the Bible, and they point to passages in Acts generally that talk about household baptisms. And then they point to Jesus not hindering the children from coming to him. I don't know the reference for that. I think it's in both Matthew and Luke. And then on the Presbyterian side, they do appeal to those same passages, but they base their justification of infant baptism more on the idea of covenant theology. And what covenant theology says basically is that the way God works or relates to people is through agreements known as covenants. And they view the Old Testament covenant with Israel as equivalent to the New Testament covenant in the church. And so, since circumcision was the sign of the covenant in the Old Testament, baptism is the kind of the new version of circumcision. It's almost viewed as the same thing as circumcision in the new covenant of the church. And therefore, because covenants have, in the view of the Reformed theologian, always applied to families and included children, and since children were circumcised, therefore children, or infants specifically, ought to be baptized as well to welcome them into the covenant to which they belong.
All right. And then what would you consider your view to be?
So I take a more, I guess you would call it a Baptist view, where I don't think infant baptism is justified. I don't see it in the biblical evidence. What I do see is baptism following repentance and placing faith in Jesus Christ. So baptism is a sign of being welcomed into the church, and it's a public declaration of faith. It's not specifically related to the covenant, nor do we just do it based on some confused Lutheran idea that it might possibly bring people to salvation. I see it as more symbolic generally, and I see it as symbolic of faith and repentance. And since an infant can't believe in Jesus Christ and repent of their sins, they ought not be baptized, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess just briefly going over my view or what I more lean towards. I haven't done like a ton of theological study in the issue of child baptism, but my view is generally that I don't think that it's like a necessary thing to do. So like you shouldn't like have to. I do tend to trend towards the Baptist position of baptism as well. Where I might differ is that I don't really have an issue with child baptism just from like a traditional perspective. I mean, just because like something isn't necessarily mentioned that you have to do in the Bible doesn't necessarily mean that it's a wrong thing to do. And if you want to from that traditional perspective, I think that that's fine. Although I'm not convinced that it does like anything super spiritual or anything beyond just being a symbol. And I guess like elaborating on like growing up, my church did had just like believers baptism. So like you make the decision to follow Jesus, and then you get baptized when you get to that position, which could be like, I mean, there's kids who do it, or you could be like an adult at any age and do that. And then instead of doing child baptism, they did child dedications, which I think makes sense. I mean, there's at least if you look at Jesus, Jesus was dedicated at the temple, and then he was baptized as an adult, and I think that that's at least what I was told was the reasoning for doing that.
Yeah, and I don't have any issue with like the child dedication service. I kind of snicker at it from the back pew because it's kind of just trying to be infant baptism by another name. But
And then
like
what was it at the last service that they called it? What they call it?
I
Yeah.
don't remember. They were like, we're not going to call it a
So
child
stupid.
what I don't remember. They came up with like some very slightly different term to try and make it clear that it wasn't just infant baptism without
It's like
water, and it was clear to everyone that what they were doing was basically
it
infant baptism without
was
water.
so weird. It was like they tried to like orient it more towards the parents than the child or
Yeah,
something like that. I can't remember
it
what that was.
wasn't.
So weird though. I just call it child dedications. That's literally what you're doing.
It's fine. Yeah,
Yeah. Oh, that was weird. Yeah. All right. So, man, what else do we want to talk about with this topic? I
I
guess
mean,
we threw it down mentioning like, is there like I guess just discussing the tension between denominations regarding
mhm.
baptism, and those views and like how that could be reconciled or lead to increased church unity or something like that. What's your thoughts?
Well, I think it's kind of tricky. I think generally the believer on the reformed side is more willing to be like, hey, we should do unity because, in their view, believers' baptism isn't bad. Like, if you come to faith as an adult, you should be baptized as an adult. So they're like, yeah, sure, we can do unity with you. Whereas the Baptist is like, yeah, but we don't think that infant baptism is a genuine expression of baptism. So it's a little harder to go from Baptist to like Reformed than it is to go from Reformed to Baptist, I think.
Yeah, I'd probably agree with that. Is there any other topics? We had a discussion at brunch today. What was that about? Like trending maybe towards another denomination? Because like right now we both
Yeah.
generally call ourselves non-denominationals, right?
Yeah.
More or less. But like we were both discussing how like we are maybe being influenced towards a different denomination, and like because I know like for me I like I mean Redeem Zoomer more or less has been influencing me at least because like I really like what he's doing with his Reconquista movement. I don't necessarily agree with like all of his theology, but I think that
Mhm.
trying to retake those mainline churches that have gone to theological liberalism or just a general false Christianity and taking those back to as a way to bring Christianity back into the core of the culture to give Christianity more strength in the actual culture war. I really like that, and
Mhm.
Zoomer's also very critical towards non-denominationalism. He would generally prefer he sees it as a result of conservative retreatism, which basically just means that if a church, say, incorporates a theologically liberal view, the conservatives leave and start their own church, and a lot of those churches end up being non-denominational or unaffiliated with a denomination. And of course, some non-denominational churches are affiliated with the denomination, but they may not necessarily display it. And of course, I feel like most, like at least from what I've seen, most non-denom churches tend to be Baptist, but their
Yeah.
theology oftentimes with maybe a Pentecostal influence. So, of course, Baptist Costal is a term you might hear to refer to that. So, like, it's not like their theology is necessarily like completely independent of denominations, but it's just that they are separate from that church tradition entirely, which, in a way, at least in theory, removes some of their influence within the community around them. I
Yeah.
don't know if that was kind of a ramble there.
Well, I mean, I rambled for like forever on the different views on baptism, so that's okay. I too, the only reason I'm not a Presbyterian right now is because I don't believe infant baptism is a genuine expression of baptism. If
Mhm.
I were convinced that infant baptism were legitimate, I would go down to the local Presbyterian church and like sign up or whatever.
Yeah, and like you already agree with like Calvinism, right?
Yeah, I'm a Calvinist. I like Reformed theology. I think covenant theology is the best model we have for how God relates to people over time. It's certainly better than dispensationalism, which I'm highly critical of. The only thing is infant baptism. That's it. And maybe like one or two other really inconsequential views that
Hmm.
aren't really that important.
Yeah, and then Calvinism is an interesting topic for me because like I didn't really know of Calvinism as like a viewpoint. Like maybe it
Mhm.
was like kind of a niche sort of viewpoint because like the churches that I grew up at just completely Arminian.
Yeah,
Like they didn't even talk about the idea of Calvinism. But as I've looked into it, I think there's some things that Calvinism says that I can agree with, or at least recognize to it. Like I now consider it like a completely legitimate theological view. I think there's good theological evidence to support Calvinism, although like you could also argue there's good theological evidence for the opposition. Which is
mhm,
why it is kind of somewhat of a difficult issue. But like, I mean, specifically talking about like predestination, which obviously isn't like the full part of Calvinism, but I do, I'm, I think I am trending more towards believing in predestination from the Calvinist perspective.
Sumer's getting to you.
He's getting, yeah, I don't. What is my biggest disagreement with Zoomer? Um,
I used to be kind of annoyed at Zoomer for like his whole non-denominational churches are bad
that's probably
thing.
my biggest disagreement with him. Yeah,
But the thing is, now I'm like, wait, I mean, I'm not going to say they're like 100% bad, but I do think that like unity between individual congregations and like, I think denominations as a whole are a good thing. Like, churches should be cooperating with each other, and we shouldn't
yeah.
pursue non denominationalism just because we think like that's bad or something.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think like part of that is just that like non-denomination is sort of antithetical to the entire Reconquista movement because of how it
Yeah,
relates to conservative retreatism. So I
sure.
think that there's just part of that is the reason why he is so aggressive toward it. I think like the one other view that I'm skeptical of his is his theistic evolution view because he
Sure.
does like I don't really want to get too much into it because I don't want this to go on forever, but like I think there's a lot of Christians that just write off evolution too quickly, but I also think to suggest that like to suggest that evolution, as atheists believe, happened exactly as the atheists believe, and like even though like you can try to like write in scripture to it, and I think that people have,
Mhm.
and and I think like it's not like a heretical view or anything to do so, but like I'm
Yeah.
not particularly convinced of it.
Yeah, me neither. I would be kind of critical of the theistic evolution view too, I guess, but I'm also convinced that it's a fully legitimate viewpoint for a Christian to hold.
Hmm.
We should probably discuss both that and Calvinism in some later episodes because they're interesting topics,
Sure.
but
We should probably
probably
start
not.
writing down these ideas instead of just saying
Yeah,
them.
probably. Probably.
Yeah, I should probably get my notebook. Like I have like 10 of those like little notebooks and I don't use any of them. And then I just maybe I can use one for ideas for this show, I guess.
That would be good.
Yeah. All right. We're gonna just move on to going through some Twitter posts.
Yeah, let's
Like we
go on
always
to our
like we always do. Okay.
interneting section.
All right. Let me set this up here. You can stop sharing your
All right,
screen too
I
if
shall
you
do
wanna
so.
not have your computer blow up.
All right, let's see.
All right, let's see here.
Oh boy. Okay.
Oh boy. Okay. Let's
Okay,
go
here
over
we
here.
go.
Okay, here we go.
We're
So we're
through
just gonna go through like we
some of
always
these
do some of these
posts.
Twitter posts.
I had like
I
3
had like
weeks to
3 weeks to bookmark
but I
stuff,
wasn't
but
on
I wasn't
Twitter
on
as
Twitter as much just because I was focusing on like my final projects and stuff.
so
Yeah.
So
it was also
it
a
was
little bit
also a little bit
dry.
dry. I don't know if like the algorithm seems to be feeding me more just
Like one
like one
sentence
sentence tweets
or just
or just memes, which like I mean like you can discuss those a little bit, but they aren't as like deep enough.
Anyway,
Anyway, so here's
this
this first one. This is a meme from Christian Memes and Fun. So that
It's
it's
basically
just mocking. I guess you could say prosperity gospel, but just this general idea that somehow being a believer will remove suffering or make suffering less.
Yeah, I mean, there's a sense in which being a believer might make suffering less, and that it's more bearable because you have the support of Christ. You can lean on your belief in God during those times. But like objectively, you will experience no less suffering, and in fact, it's probable you will even experience more if you're a Christian.
Yeah, definitely. It's certainly no easy thing. The Book of Job, I think, is a phenomenal read, even if you're not a Christian.
Yeah,
But I think it is also one of the Old Testament books that all Christians should become familiar with, just because of how well I think it addresses the issue of suffering.
yeah, I agree.
Which is, I think, something that like some Christians might just be afraid to talk about. But
I think
just
so.
because like there's a lot of skeptic arguments that sort of go off of this idea of suffering. And so it's definitely a challenge to a lot of believers. But I think the Book of Job is just very good at dealing with that.
Yeah, I love the Book of Job. I mean, I already mentioned I'm a Calvinist, so I think a lot about things like the interaction between God's will and humans' will, and why does God allow suffering and all that kind of thing. And the Book of Job obviously plays a lot into that. I have read this year probably the most abysmally bad exegetical treatments of Job of all time. Hold on, I think I have the book right here, actually. Yes, here it is. Do not read this book. This book is horrible. Like, let me not put it in front of my face. It's a really sad book, first of all. And then secondly, the theological views expressed in this book are really inaccurate. Don't read this book. Complete tangent.
Yeah, I remember you were talking about that book a while back and how bad it was. Yeah, we're doing book reviews now on the show, I guess. See, I don't read very often other than outside of my Bible, so I kind of wish that I did.
Another book earlier too, because like I have like 10 of them around right now.
All right. Anyways, let's move on here. So this is a take from Zoomer. He's suggesting that the gods of other religions are real, but they're not gods; they're just demons. So do you agree with this? I know, like I made a Twitter or Insta story about this. I don't know if.
No, I thought your Insta story hit the idea pretty much perfectly on the head. Like, I'm not willing to say that every single false god ever thought up. I'm not willing to say there's a demon behind every one, but I do think it's quite likely that most of the especially more popular false gods of other religions do have a demon behind them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think like the one thing that I mentioned is that sometimes gods were just like imaginary creations to explain natural phenomena.
Yeah.
That's something that I mentioned. So like for example, Zeus, like is there a demon behind Zeus, or is Zeus just the construction based off of not understanding how the weather works? I mean, you could argue it's both. Something like that. Yeah, I wrote like a good paragraph about this in my Insta story.
I think what we can say is that probably the Greek conception of Zeus as a divine entity is false. There is no such entity in existence. We could argue maybe that there is potentially a demon behind that entity, or even multiple demons, but I don't know if we can say that with absolute certainty.
Yeah, I think that like one should hesitate before claiming demons. In a lot of cases, like you have like the Christian crowd that like everything is demonic unless like the Bible explicitly says otherwise. I think that's just a very dangerous way of thinking, because first of all, God has power over demons, so it's essentially irrelevant in a lot of cases if something's demonic or not.
Yeah, for sure. And like objectively, there's not a demon behind every bush. There just isn't.
Right. And obviously, there's like some cases where, like, yeah, there probably is, like,
Yeah, for sure.
performing like a lot of new age ideologies, tarot cards, Ouija boards, stuff like that.
Oh yeah, I have no doubt that there's like demonic force behind that kind of activity. And like if
Yeah.
you look at like people who would identify themselves as pagans or witches today, they are engaging in those activities extensively.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's move on here. So this is just. Oh gosh, am I gonna have to make this? I'm just gonna make this a little bit smaller. Whoops. No.
Do you want me to get out the book again? I can get out the book again.
All right, here we go. So this is just. But I think it's just like it's like the cycle of kind of like the pendulum swing between traditional and progressive, sort of. This idea that like the traditions are oftentimes created as the solution to a problem, but then if you eradicate the problem, then people will reject the traditional aspect and question what the purpose of it was.
I think you posted this on your Insta too.
I
Unlike
probably I post like every tweet I see on my Insta story at this point. Like,
I think this is probably a little bit oversimplified, honestly. Like,
yeah, probably.
not every tradition is a solution, and even the traditions that are solutions generally aren't perfect.
True. But I think like you can also just use it in the logic of, oh, here's a wall. I want to get past the wall without understanding why the wall is there. I can't remember
Yeah.
what that philosophical position. There's a name for that. I can't remember what it is. I really like that particular logic. But yeah, I do agree that this might be an oversimplification of it. Anything else to say here? I don't know how many we got to go through.
I
Oh,
feel
no.
like that could be like a really long conversation, but I haven't thought it through enough to have that conversation just now.
Great. All right. So now we get to this post. I was very I was going crazy responding to this post, making just a bunch of word salad rambles while we were like driving back from church that one week or whatever. I had to know what I was saying at this point. So the thing about like Hometh is that like 90% of his posts I think are very reasonable, and then the other 10% will throw something like this out. Which of course I don't completely disagree with what he's saying there, but I think he's incorrectly addressing the actual problem in it. Because like, I mean, obviously, so math, from what I know, was raised, I think, Catholic, and so he generally has the perspective of religion is a good thing because of the structure it brings to society and the values it imposes onto people. Although he doesn't, of course, I guess he's not an atheist. He holds to more of a like it's kind of like a deist perspective sort of thing. I think he also does a little bit of the new age stuff as well. But I don't know, it's kind of interesting because like obviously like what he's trying to argue here is that we should be teaching like the lessons in the Bible instead of arguing with each other about like specific theological ideas.
I have a couple thoughts on this post. So first of all, why would you pick this, the servant who doubled his master's silver, as your example of a moral teaching from the Bible? Like, there are so many simpler moral teachings of the Bible that everyone would go like, yeah, that makes sense. I'd be interested in hearing him explain exactly what he thinks this means, because like it's not that simple, honestly. And second of all, I think this is just an abysmally bad tweet.
It is, especially the last
Yeah.
section there is the worst part of it, because I mean Paul mentions, I can't remember which book it is, that well, I don't know. Okay, what am I saying? the thing is that like if Jesus was not God, then the gospel is essentially forfeit. That's not exactly like Paul says. Like if Christ was not like raised from the dead, then that's what I was saying. But like
We of all people are most to be pitied, I think is the phrase he uses.
something like that, yeah. So like the thing is like I think is that Matt is trying to say, or like at least he probably believes that the Bible's not the inspired word of God, and therefore the teachings in it are just written by humans as a way to bring in traditions or ideas to make a better society. But I think the error is that you have to recognize that the Bible, being the inspired word of God, is the reason for why it has these good teachings in it, and that's an essential aspect. And you probably won't get every single teaching within Scripture unless you actually believe that it is from God and you've submitted to Christ. Of course, like maybe not, but I think that it at least gives a little bit more of a strong perspective on a lot of those teachings if you do actually believe that they are teachings directly from God.
Yeah, and I'd also like to add to this C.S. Lewis's idea of a liar, madman, or God, I think it's called. So what Lewis said is that Jesus made such outrageous claims in the Bible, claims to divinity, to the power to forgive sins, to raise the dead to life, that he's one of three things. Either he's a liar, what he said cannot have been true, and he was just making it up. He was crazy, he didn't know what he was saying, or he really was who he said he was, namely God.
Mm-hmm.
Like this Jesus was a good moral teacher route that math is trying to argue for here just isn't available to us. He can't be just a good moral teacher based on some of the stuff he said.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right. Now the thing is, I do agree with one thing here, and is that I do think that at times Christians might get distracted fighting each other on minimal, minute theological differences when in reality they should be mostly working together to push the faith forward. Of course, that's not necessarily what math is saying, but I think that's at least my perspective. I'm like, yeah, there is something to say about overly obsessing over theological accuracy, over
Yeah, for sure.
the Great Commission, sending out and preaching the gospel.
Right, like the split between the Orthodox and Catholic Church over like 2 words in the Nicene Creed comes to mind. But yeah, there have definitely been some times when we've taken relatively minor bits of theology a little bit too serious.
Sure. All right. So here's the next one here. I got a couple more. So I think this is just something that like shouldn't be much of an issue, but here we are. So John Rich says Joe Biden just pardoned Hunter, but Jesus won't. And I think John Root is responding. I think his response is it's good.
Yeah.
Because like the thing is like the idea Christianity preaches the idea that everyone can be saved. They just have to submit to Christ. So I mean, technically speaking, if Hunter Biden does not submit to Christ, then yeah, Jesus won't pardon him. And I mean, maybe that's what John Rich is saying here. But I think that it is. I mean, sometimes saying just a single sentence on Twitter might not be the most appropriate way to accurately describe or explain the Christian perspective.
Yeah, and from like a strictly theological sense, I would kind of object to the word pardon being used here in the sense of like justification. That's not a very pardon is not the word you should be using here if we're talking about salvation. I understand why he used the word in this context, but it's bad.
Yeah, and you even have the community note at the bottom of there. Basically saying Jesus forgave the people who whipped him and nailed to a cross, which is true.
Yes.
So like forgiveness, all that takes for forgiveness is to submit to Christ and to believe that he died and rose again, which of course is just the core of the gospel. So this is an actual gospel issue. This is actual theological debate that should matter.
Yeah. This is the kind of thing that happens when you put politics above your faith. You end up saying something like this.
That's very true. I think we got one more, maybe two. I don't know. Oh gosh. All right, so this is Seamus from Freedom Tunes responding to apparently there's a group called Catholics for Choice, and yes, it's that choice, the abortion one. So, oh gosh, where do we start with this?
Wow. Okay, look, I'll be honest here. I love this. You suggest Mary had a right to kill Christ in her womb only because you have killed Christ in your heart. That strikes me as like the perfect response.
It's a very, very good response. It's pretty, like, it's harsh, but it's appropriately harsh in this instance.
Yeah. I would also. What do we mean when we say Mary had a choice here? Because like, when the angel Gabriel came to her, he wasn't like, you're going to bear a child and you can abort that child if you want. It was.
It's like, no. You could argue that like Mary was chosen because she wouldn't have aborted Christ.
Yeah.
It's such a baffling statement that Catholics for Choice makes. I mean, the group of itself seems to be an oxymoron based on the teachings of the Catholic Church itself, which is strange because the Catholics like to say that they have at least unity under the authority to a certain extent. So it's weird to see such a group that goes so far against Catholic teaching.
And I think in general, the Catholic Church is probably the most pro-life church in the world, probably. They're probably more committed to that particular issue than any other Christian denomination.
I would say that's probably the case as an institution. I mean, if you actually break down like the Catholic attendees, I don't know if that's true or not, but yeah, as an institution, I would say that's probably right.
I will say that in my experience, I have gone and prayed outside Planned Parenthood before with other Christians. Inevitably, at least half of the people there are Catholics.
Yeah.
Which, of course, that doesn't speak to the broader number of people sitting in the pews of a Catholic church, but there's like something there, I think.
I think I saw, I can't remember who shared it on Twitter. Someone showed that at least a different issue, but sort of related, which was gay marriage. It's related in the sense that it's a progressive viewpoint that attacks God's design. Sure. And it actually showed that non-denominationals or evangelical more broadly are the most anti-gay marriage of all of the denominations or major denominations, which I thought was kind of interesting. I think that's just proof of the conservative retreatism that Zoomer would say. It is kind of interesting, and it's possible that you would see a similar trend in the issue of abortion.
Yeah, maybe so. That's fair.
All right. Next we got Yuda. I feel like we get like a Yuda every show. So this is an interesting. So Yuda is. Yuda once was libertarian, and now he's very much not libertarian. When it comes to his politics, but I think what he says here is a conversation that is it's kind of wild if you think about it. Because, like, I mean, the person he's responding to suggests that adults could choose to kill themselves, and that would be a valid choice. Did you get that?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
Reading through it again. At first, I was still on like abortion, and I was like, "Wait, what's going on?" But I see what we're talking about now.
Okay. Sorry, I should have let you read through that. Yeah.
No, that's okay. Yeah, I agree with them.
Like, cool. I think it's kind of interesting. It adds to that sort of conversation of like, where are we allowed to maybe take a stronger stance on a particular issue compared to others? For example, I think that you can justify having a much stronger, more authoritarian position on this specific issue versus maybe abortion. Maybe you could be a little bit more lenient as we attempt to reach that end goal of banning abortion. But like in this one, I think we should just take a stand and go with that.
Yeah, I agree. Like, suicide is a huge problem in the United States and the world today. And people suggesting that suicide is a legitimate choice is not going to help the issue. We need to take a stand and say, no, suicide is not okay. there are other ways to deal with life's problems, and we'll help you do
Yeah.
that.
I should just realize that this is going to be on YouTube. I don't know if we can say some of that stuff.
Oh,
I
oops.
don't know. I mean, like, it's not like this channel's monetized yet, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, we don't get enough views to make any money.
Oh, well. I don't know. Obviously, if we eventually do get big enough, we'll have to learn how to moderate ourselves with that. Anyways,
Yeah,
all right, I
I
think
guess
that's
so.
the last tweet here. So, do we have anything else we want to say for this episode?
I think we'll probably be back next week for another episode because finals will be over then.
Probably, maybe, we'll see.
I mean, I guess then you have Christmas, so it's like, everybody's family is coming to the house. But yeah, we'll see. We will do
I
at
mean, Christmas
least.
is in the middle of the week, right? This year, I don't. Because
Yeah,
Friday's the
it's so
20th.
weird.
Yeah. So that shouldn't be too much of it. Hopefully, we'll get it up. The main challenge is going to be making sure I get everything set up in that amount of time, which I shouldn't have an issue with, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Of course, our goal is to do this weekly, so obviously that's not going to always be possible, but yeah. So
Yeah. We'll do at least a few episodes over Christmas break.
yeah. I mean, it's not technically Christmas break for me because I'll be free.
Oh yeah, you'll
Hooray.
be
Praise the
a
Lord.
free man.
Yeah. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Feel free to comment down below. That helps the algorithm get us off the ground. So go right ahead if you get this far. Anyways, thanks for watching. We'll see you guys in the next one.
See you later.